Healing is a one-time thing. You're not even going to let me finish reading it.
Nope.
Healing is a one-time thing.
Nope.
Why did you shake your head before I got there?
Okay. The reason why I shook my head is because it's not.
Right.
And today was one of those days where it was like, oh, it's not. People always want to like arrive and never have to deal with it ever again. But I don't think that's the human experience. If it's not one thing, it's another thing. You know, we live in a world that sin is running rampant. We have, if you're a believer in Jesus Christ, like you said, yes to Jesus, you have an enemy that wants to still kill and destroy you. He's not going to stop. The Bible is clear. There will be trials. Paul tells us to count it all joy. There's going to be persecution. We're going to be pressed but not crushed. Persecuted but not abandoned. Struck down but not destroyed. There is no indication that things aren't going to impact you. Mm-hmm. It just means because you are a believer, you have God on your side, those things will not take you out. Mm. So in the midst of having to be struck down, you may feel re-triggered or like your symptoms come back.
Well, I mean, we're also not only talking about like our spiritual walk too, right?
Right.
We're also talking about
mental health.
Yeah, we're also talking about mental health and
which I would
health.
argue sometimes the enemy, if he knows you, I'll speak for me. The enemy knows, how do I get Valerie? I attack her emotions. I attack how she feels about herself. I attack how she feels about other people. And I bring it about in a way that is hard for her to overcome because it happened in her childhood. It happened during a time period where my neurons are being developed and things are starting to cement in my head. And the things that were cemented weren't the most positive. Mm-hmm. So I lived a long time. Well, I'm only 31. Take with that what you will. I lived enough time where if I'm not careful, the enemy can make me feel very specific things over and over and over again. It's just new situations that are bringing it about. Mm-hmm. So I liken it to healing is like a step. I stepped here. All right. Cemented. I'm fervent in understanding myself in this capacity. I'm fervent in understanding what coping skills I need, what thoughts I need to meditate on, what scripture I need to meditate on. Then I take another step into fill in the blank of whatever the step is. It's career change, transitions, relationships, etc. I take another step. Now I'm having to go through another degree of healing where it's a little bit tougher. But because I've established a routine and habits and thought processes that got me to that step, the next step doesn't feel as hard to get to or hard to navigate. And I'm healing almost like the next layer. Mm-hmm. That's a part of it. So for example, I'll be completely transparent. Growing up, I was chubby. I was thick. Call it genetics. I say genetics because I was playing sports my entire life. And I played tennis competitively. That means you're playing tennis 6-7 days a week for hours at a time.
Serena.
Still thick. So I didn't grow up with the most positive body image. When I first started therapy, it took a lot for me to uncover where that came from. And that was my first step of recognizing this isn't something that I was meant to identify with. It was something that was happening to me. And as a child, I didn't know better. Mm-hmm. So I expected myself to know and do things that I didn't have the capacity to do because I was a child. So that was like a first step of healing, of saying, this isn't my fault. I am not inherently a bad person or a person that lacks self-control. I'm a kid who, was taught a certain thing about weight, and it was hard for me to navigate any positive aspects of that, right? So healing started with, I do not have to, this isn't on me. I didn't do this to myself. This was done to me. So that was first step of healing, because now I'm like, okay, I'm distancing myself from the problem. This is the problem. This is me. And the next step of healing was, all right, well, now that we know this, what thoughts come into your head that cause you to feel the things that you do whenever weight comes up, whether you're shopping, whether you're eating, or you go on the scale and you realized you gained weight? That was another step. It's like, okay, what are the thoughts and how do I navigate? If I can't go from negative to positive, how do I at least neutralize it? And you remember that. It was like, I couldn't go from my body sucks, I hate it, to, oh my gosh, my body's beautiful and no one can tell me nothing. I had to go to like neutral. My body has gotten me to where I am. As a mom, my body has created life, and I can look at it from a more objective standpoint because I couldn't get to positive. And I'm honestly still within that bubble of learning how to objectively see my body versus where people think I need to arrive, which is positive. Like I'm wearing crop tops and bikinis without no shame, you know?
Do you think you'll ever get to that?
I'm praying so. But this is why the healing is not a one-time thing. Like I endured another situation today where I want to upgrade my wardrobe. I've accepted I'm a thick person, so I'm trying to buy clothes that are in my size, and I'm trying to be mindful of like what my body looks like and what ways I do want to dress, but how to make it form, because I'm also curvy. So I'm like, okay, at least one thing I love about my body is I have an hourglass. So, how do we, capitalize on that? And, how do we bring some flow to that? But I had a bit of a, fiasco because I'm plus size and petite, and it's very difficult to find clothes that are stylish, that aren't uber expensive, plus size and petite. Today, I crashed because I was like, all of the shame and guilt and stuff, all of the feelings that I had even when I first started therapy came flooding into my head.
Wow.
Now, I was able to fight it and continue on with my day, whereas before it would have taken me out. I was going to go to the mall. I was like, I don't even want to go to the mall. But I ended up being able to push myself to go because I was like, all right, Val, it's okay. It's not the end of the world. What you're feeling is a lot of stuff coming up from your past, a lot of stuff that's coming up with shame and guilt. Remember, this is not your fault. It's just, this is how it is. This is what clothing is like in the US or wherever clothes are made. I don't know. We know that we have to invest in specific wear that makes you feel good, that looks good, etc. Like, I'm not going to say all the emotions went away because they didn't.
Right.
For the entire, I ended up coming home and crying to my best friend about it. But the fact that I was able to get at least to that objective point where I was able to recognize it and to push through the emotion was huge.
Yeah.
I said a lot to say. I do better explaining things through examples, and hopefully you guys are able to identify your own situations with that. But the healing is still continuing. It just, the steps are happening.
Well, that's why I'm here, because
Emotions still came, but I was able to navigate them better, whereas before I would have kaput.
Yeah.
And you know it. You've seen it.
I've seen it. And I've seen that struggle since before we got married, since we were dating.
Yeah.
So what that makes me think is, if let's say your situation is something different, right? Body image doesn't bother me nearly as much as it bothers Valerie, but for you it might be, just self-image, like your own self-concept or whatever, something that you're constantly struggling with. It might be a mental illness. It might be OCD or bipolar 2 or depression, like me.
A lot of people have shame about those things too.
And the crazy thing that I'm thinking about, that I'm learning from your example, is that as soon as you overcome one thing that like has to do with the thing that you're struggling with, there's a huge possibility that another completely different kind of trigger will come in and bother a different part of it, right? So like in my head, I'm thinking of like for depression, right? My problems when I was 17 and depressed are completely different from when I'm 32 and depressed, right? But they still can they can still aggravate the depression, right? There can be new stressors that poke at the emotions from an older point of trauma. I think that's one of the reasons why in our last episode when we were talking about coping mechanisms, I'm going to pull something I said from there into this. I think this is why also when we're struggling with something, we should be vigilant about like, how am I feeling? Why am I suddenly really anxious and none of my usual anxiety things are around me? What's going on? Healing is not a destination. Even if you broke your leg and you got it reset, you still would have to take care of your leg differently, even though the bone is now reconnected. So the reality is healing is not a destination, but it's a habit. So what does a habit of healing actually look like? My only answer for that would be something that my therapist used to say a whole lot. He would always tell me it is not about being perfect, but it's about making better and healthier choices, right? And letting that be the barometer for how am I doing, right? So like if my mood was in the dumps for the entire week and like nothing could get me out of it, but I bathed every day, I cooked dinner. I took care of my family. I did all of the things that I know will keep me from getting dug in deeper, right? Those are healthier choices than just going in the room, laying under the covers and never coming out. You get what I'm saying? And I think that's a better barometer, a better indication of emotional, mental, and spiritual growth than just being like, well, I am now fixed. Boom, baby.
Right.
Anything else for that one? Great.
Nope.